Welcome to Context. I'm Lorna Duick. In our deeply divided and violent world, bullying, racism, and hatred trickles down from the generation and spills out onto our streets, into our schools, destroying the fabric of our societies. Today on Context, we take a look at how the roots of hatred are growing across Canada. We'll get some answers today on making a better tomorrow.
For a month, we've been trying to get this dealt with. Everyone failed my son, even I did. I tried to save him and I couldn't get to him in time.
A heart-wrenching admission there from Devon Salvis' mother responding after the tragic stabbing of her 14-year-old son. Bullying moved to murder charges against a 14 and a 16-year-old. Detective Paul Corrigan is from the Hamilton Police Hate Crimes Unit. And Detective, before we get into hate crimes, I just want to ask how Hamilton Police Services are reacting when you have a mother saying, everybody has failed my son.
It's a tragedy, the death of Devon. It's affected everybody, including in the police department. Many police officers have children of similar age, so we've taken it very badly too. There is an ongoing investigation, so it's difficult for me to comment on that. I know the school board is doing a full investigation. Also, the police department is doing a full investigation to find exactly what happened and what factors were responsible for this horrible, tragic event.
It has been a wake-up call that has got me thinking now about hate crimes, and I didn't realize Hamilton, as a microcosm of Canada, is leading. It's got the unfortunate distinction of being Canada's city with the most hate crimes. Yeah. This is your beat that you've got to figure this out. Tell us just how you are defining hate crimes.
So hate crime is defined by the criminal code as a criminal offense, so it has to be a criminal offense like assault or robbery, intimidation. It's in the criminal code, and we can prove that there's a hate bias aspect to it, a hate bias motivation behind it, then it becomes a hate crime.
It's getting very public. Yeah. Since last October, every week you see this in front of Hamilton City Hall. Yeah. Since last October, yellow vests, anti-immigrant group with ties to extremist groups like Soldiers of Odin, Proud Boys. This footage, these folks have been very disruptive in Hamilton. We haven't known what to do about it. The mayor's been criticized, didn't go fast enough to shut it down. This is a free speech issue also. Yeah. What are you dealing with here with this kind of demonstrations?
So with the demonstration, first of all, it costs a lot of resources, a lot of police resources. A lot of people are brought in overtime to cover to make sure that the peace is kept, because that's the number one priority as a police department, public safety and keeping the peace. My job, as I've been there most Saturdays since last October, is to monitor the event and make sure that nobody breaches the criminal code. Under free speech, you can say what you like as long as you don't break off section 319 of the criminal code. So 319 says that you can't advocate for hate. So we monitor these signs, we monitor what people are saying, and up to this point, we haven't had anybody step over that line because people know what the law is and they know on which side of it to stay.
It is far more vitriolic than I ever expected to hear on Canadian streets. Yeah. Who are the perpetrators?
Well, we don't know. I mean, the rise in populism worldwide, we have it all over the world where people are becoming more easier to say things on social media, which wasn't there before. So we find that people are saying things which normally you wouldn't have said in public. So I think it's giving people a license to think that they can say what they want, and in effect they can. I mean, we have Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allows people freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of religion. So it's not against the law to say, I don't like you. Hate is not a crime.
Do you know what kind of numbers we're talking about in Hamilton? How many are in these hate groups?
It's different. Like some weeks we get 5 people turning up there, other weeks we've had up to 100 people. So it differs, 50, 60, 70 to 100 on really busy Saturdays. Other times we've had 5 to 10.
And they just yell
Yep.
this disagreement.
Yep.
And it is over. Are there groups named? Like, is it anti-immigrant? Is it anti-black? Is it anti-gay?
No, it's not anti-black. It's not anti-gay. It's some groups don't want immigration. They want restraints on how many people can come into Canada. Other people are against the federal government. People are against the cutting of pipelines. They want jobs for Canadians, that type of thing. A lot of it is nationalism. So people have this idea that to be Canadian, you have to be a white European. We get that type of thing. But overt racism, comments, homophobic comments, we haven't had. We've had people report that people have said certain things to them, go back to your own country, things like that. But generally, we have had nothing of a criminal code nature that we can actually arrest somebody for.
Okay, Detective Paul Corrigan, thank you for being on the streets every Saturday to monitor that. But stay with us because I want to bring in a Hamilton activist in on this conversation. Not the kind of Canada we expect to see. We're going to continue with our building community here and a conversation with Detective Corrigan and an activist from Hamilton, Kojo Damptey, the director of the Centre for Civic Inclusion. You were both involved at that event. Kojo, why did you go? That was a People Party of Canada presentation last month in Hamilton. Why did you go?
Yes, we were there to support the many residents that disagree with some of the language and some of the rhetoric that has been displayed from the People's Party of Canada. So we were there to support the many residents and also ensure that residents' voices are heard.
Detective, I didn't expect that an elderly couple could be shouted at, called Nazi scum, and that's just harassment, right? That's not a crime.
It is a crime. It's a crime of harassment. And if you stay in somebody's way, it's also a mischief. If you stop them, blocking them going into a building, that can also be a charge of mischief under the criminal code.
So you were there, as you have been since last October, at every kind of public protest that is, in my view, very hate-filled. It's not good neighborliness.
No.
And why can't it just be shut down, go home, everybody, you're gone?
Freedom of speech. Section 2 of the Charter on Rights and Freedom. Everybody has a right, within very small limits, there's some limits to that speech, to protest. People turn up, they disagree with what's being said, and then other people turn up to counter-protest. Everybody has the right to do that.
Kojo, is it getting out of hand in Hamilton? Should more be done?
Yes, I think it's getting out of hand. I would say that yes, everyone has freedom of expression. However, there are limitations to that freedom of expression, especially when it comes to issues around hate. Hate is experienced from Black, Indigenous people of color. So they understand what it feels like when somebody uses a racial slur or somebody makes a comment that is dehumanizing.
What are the limits, though? What the detective is telling us, it has to be actually a crime has to have been committed.
Yes, and I would say that is the limit. That is the limitation, and that is the point that we're trying to solve. We can't wait for it to be a crime before we say it's a hate crime. So if someone is going to harass someone, use dehumanizing language, we can't wait for some violent act to happen before we charge that individual with a hate crime. And this goes back again to what Black, Indigenous people of color have been saying, that in this country there's a history of racism, and that racism leads to racist policy, leads to marginalization, leads to oppression. And so that is why it's important for us to listen to what residents are saying so that we can change that perception.
What would you like the police to do? And we can't wait until a crime is what Kojo's saying.
Kojo's absolutely right. So what we do is we have the criminal offences that we record, but we also record incidents. So no criminal offence, and some police departments don't do this. In Hamilton, we encourage people to come forward if a racial slur is used, or if a homophobic slur, or if an Islamophobic slur is used, to call the police, and we record it, and we try and identify who's responsible for it. And then we go speak to these people. A number of times I've gone to speak to suspects in incidents like this, even though it's not a criminal offence. And we counsel them on what they've said and how inappropriate it is. But the important part of that is that we record that information, that if down the road there is a violent incident, as Kojo said, we now have proof that there's a history of racism or homophobia or Islamophobia for that person.
But Kojo, we never used to see this on our streets. And Detective, we didn't have to have police duty on every night, every weekend since October. It's worse, isn't it, Kojo?
I would say, I wouldn't say it's worse. I would say that now it's out in the open. I think Black, Indigenous people of color have been experiencing this since 1876, right? Yeah. But then now it's become mainstream. It is in the political discourse. So now we're seeing that in the public sphere or in the public discourse. So that is why for some individuals in Canada, it might seem like, where is this coming from? But again, this started in 1876 when Sir John A. Macdonald called Indigenous people savages, right? And that is the root of all these issues around hate. It is indifference, and that's where we are.
All right. Well, it's time to take it back to our homes. Thank you for the wake-up call that you both have been. Thank you for your good work on the front lines of preventing hate.
Thank you.
When you see someone that you know is being bullied, whether the bullying has taken place at that time when you see them or not, it doesn't matter. Reach out to them. Give them love. Give them friendship. Give them somebody they can trust.
That's Kevin Ellis speaking at Devon Salvis Vigil just after that 14-year-old boy was murdered in cold blood in front of his mother outside of his school. Kevin is here today with Kyle Scott. Both are on a mission to fight bullying. This is about hatred, bullying that ends in murder. Kyle, why was it so important that you get involved in that school?
To get involved, this isn't the only case I find that happens. We need to have a voice for these ones that can't speak up, and we want to be there to be that voice for these kids that need.
I didn't expect it to be not only a biker, Kevin. You are part of a biker gang. You're part of the Knights of Templar, a very unique movement of the Christian church. And you insisted, and at the mother's consent and request, come on, Hamilton, we've got to pull together for this. Why?
Absolutely. The whole idea behind what we did was we had to bring the community together that was in a rage, angry, and out for justice, and the old term of out for blood. And I had to try and reel that in. As a community advocate and someone that loves their country, it was important to get everybody to find peace, love, and unity at a time of great anger and mistrust.
There's a lot of problems about why the school didn't catch this, who said, he said, all of these different things. But both of you, Kyle, you've been in to fight for your nieces and nephews on bullying peace. There's a family problem here. What are you discovering, Kyle?
I find that it's starting within the homes. There's a lot that has changed within the homes of these children, and the respect and values have definitely gone a different way than what they were prior to this.
You've got a bullying campaign with the T-shirts. It's active both on the U.S. side, the Canada side, and yet we've heard T-shirts aren't enough. What is enough?
We need to have a voice, and we need to go out there and we need to stand for this, and we need to not let this go on deaf ears. Is what was one of the biggest things that I find is making sure this stays at the forefront and it just doesn't go away.
Okay, so first in families, Kevin, what do families need, and why are you then moving this into law?
The message to families is quite clear, and that is, one, to stop automatically assuming your child is innocent of bullying, and don't get angry when you go to the school. We have to teach our children empathy once again. It's something that we seem to have lost sight of. We have to love our neighbors, love our friends, and love our community. And the parents, when they attend the schools now, when they're called in because their child's accused of bullying, for the most part, the majority, a high majority, come in angry. And anger does not fix anything.
Because they think my child couldn't be the problem.
Absolutely. They come in and demanding that their child's not the problem. And the child's with them when this is happening. I've sat there with the school liaison officers and listened to parents scream at the top of their lungs. They have no business accusing their child of doing such a thing. And the kid's sitting right there watching their parents act like that. Who's the bully and where are they learning it? It starts at home.
You both are getting a lot of attention, and we didn't expect we would need biker gang guys to say, Hamilton School District, behave. But you also want to make this a criminal code campaign around Devon's death. What are you looking for?
Essentially, what I want to do is I want to implement change into the Criminal Code of Canada that first and foremost takes it out of the Crown's hands on when they decide that a case of a juvenile acting like an adult and committing a murder or a crime, it should be automatic. There should be a set rule that's set in place that says if they murder, if they shoot and hurt someone, it automatically becomes an adult crime. And I also want to set in place rules for strict bullying that gets put into the criminal code as of opposed to being at the discretion of the school boards. I want it to become part of the laws of our country so that we can follow the laws that our country has laid out for us. As Christ taught us, we are held accountable to the laws of the land, and as Christians and as the average person, we must follow those rules.
All right. Well, and you're pledging to the family to do this in Devon's memory. All the best to both of you, and we're going to have you back a little later in the show just to talk about what can be done spiritually to shape these families and these homes.
Beautiful.
More after this.
Thank you.
I want to say, you know, can we all get along? Can we get along?
The late Rodney King there, whose plea for peace echoed around the world after the 1992 race riots of Los Angeles. Well, how much have we been learning from the U.S. on hate crimes? Our next guest researches hate crime in Canada, and Professor Ifram Chaudhry from the MacEwan University in Edmonton joins us now. Professor Chaudhry, thank you. What is the difference between hate crime in Canada versus America?
Well, the motivating factors are the same in terms of a real or perceived hatred or bias towards an identifiable group based on usually social identity factors. But the difference, I would say, between the two countries is how we have a standardized, somewhat standardized approach to hate crime in the States, because in the 1990s, there was the Hate Crime Stats Collection Act that the U.S. had administered that encourages all law enforcement to document and report hate crimes to a national standardized database. Whereas in Canada, we don't have that same kind of national act, let's say, compelling law enforcement to report and document, but we still have, through the Uniform Crime Report, annual hate crime data available through Stats Canada. So how the data is collected and information is captured, the differences are there between kind of the legislated approach in the U.S. and the non-legislated approach in Canada. So that's one of the starting points for sure.
And it is a problem, isn't it, that we don't have that same kind of organized approach nationally to how we collect that? Is it because this is newer to us, or it's covered already by the criminal code, or why isn't it uniform across the country?
I think there hasn't been as strong of a onus, I would say, nationally to have a standardized definition. I mean, across Canada, each police service has very similar variations of the definition around what a hate crime is. But what that ends up doing is it leaves a lot of flexibility and discretion for officers to address it in, the best way forward with the information that they have.
Who are the hate groups in Canada? What are they called?
Most recently, you have variations of the Soldiers of Odin. You have in Alberta a group called the 3 Percenters. You've also had a group who aren't as active as much now, but in the mid-2010s, 2012, 2015, Blood and Honor. So we've had a lot of recent activity around some of the groups that, always kind of house around different forms of white identity and white nationalism. And oftentimes the biggest rallying cry between the groups does evolve around immigration and anti-immigration specifically. And so I think that's some of the conversations we've seen over the last number of years here in Canada, where, some of the groups that are connected to even the Yellow Vest movement, who for the most part just are trying to share their, disgust around the current government. Some of these hate groups are gravitating towards some of those movements because there is an element of the Yellow Vest movement wanting to look at immigration and, starting to regulate even further than we do now around who we let into Canada. And so that narrative really speaks loudly to some of the folks on the right-wing extremism and white supremacy side, because a lot of those folks are very, very anti-immigrant and anti-racialized immigrant, to be quite bluntly.
Okay, so we're not talking tens of thousands in these groups. We're talking maybe less than 10,000 all across Canada in these 5 different groups you've mentioned.
I would say even less than that. In 2015, there was a national study that came out through Barbara Perry, who's the leading hate crime researcher in Canada. And I think she was able to gather there's about 500 active across Canada. But when you break it down by province, it's maybe 10 to a range from 10 to 20, depending on activity levels during that time frame that you're seeing in any given jurisdiction. So the numbers individually are pretty small, but collectively, I think there's an impact. More broadly, the online factor, of course, does provide different ideologies to manifest themselves as well.
All right, Irfan Chowdhury, hate crime researcher at MacEwan University. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
A lot of the schools have forced you out, dear Lord, but that is not where we stand. As a community, we understand that there is power in Christ and that there is power in believing in the Lord.
A prayer there from Kevin Ellis, who was leading the vigil for Devon Selvey, the 14-year-old boy murdered at his Hamilton High School recently. And Kevin, you talked to us about moving the presence of God into schools where there's a great need for good teaching on values and what shapes the character. We have two people here from Move In, founder Nigel Paul and Lindsay Mencken. Lindsay, that is your neighborhood. You were at that vigil. What did you do to move in the love of God into this kind of neighborhood?
Yeah, so I felt called to move into this neighborhood specifically. There wasn't a lot of Bible-believing church presence. And yeah, just saw the need for boundaries to be broken by Jesus.
And so that's your home now?
That's
your home now. And
yes.
did you face a little bit of opposition about that?
Yes, actually, when I was telling people I was moving into that neighborhood, almost everybody told me not to move into the neighborhood, that it was the worst. Yeah.
It isn't. It is a crime hotspot. I'm sure your folks thought like I would think, are you sure you want to do this? But Nigel Paul, this is actually the movement in Canada of radical Christians. I think we've got 3 or 4 of them around the table today, and you're encouraging people, move in with the love of Jesus where there is hatred.
Yeah, I think as believers and even just as human beings, when we see an unsafe neighborhood, we say, okay, we shouldn't move there. But in Move In, we move in because it's unsafe and because somebody needs to be there to show the love of Christ to the people who live there.
What difference does it make, Lindsay?
It's huge. It tells people who may not feel accepted that they are accepted, that you are human and you are loved, that love is possible.
Because you break down the I don't know you.
Yeah, yeah. Or that just the messages that society gives about who's valuable, who's not valuable. By moving into a neighborhood, an unsafe neighborhood, to break those boundaries, that I think it changes, it can change the entire city.
How many neighborhoods are we doing this in Canada, Nigel?
Well, worldwide, we're in 85 neighborhoods, 39 cities and 13 countries. In Canada, about 60 of those teams are in Canada.
16.
60.
60 teams are moved into high trouble neighborhood. What do you think of this? Is this going to be part of the answer to getting some good love of God back into places that need it most?
I absolutely think it is. I mean, at the end of the day, when people look at me and I walk into somewhere and I'm preaching about God and the first thing they see is a biker, it does say volumes to any one of us could be a soldier of Christ or a child of God. And I think that if we all take the time to preach that word and try to welcome one another regardless of race, religion, or color or creed, we can make this world a better place, so yes.
Is this like a long-term plan, Move In? Lindsay, are you going to stay long-term in these kind of high-risk neighborhoods, specifically the one you're in?
Yes, yeah. I definitely feel called that this neighborhood specifically is where I'll be for a while. And whether I'm a part of Move In or not, that's the lifestyle I choose to live.
And what's God doing in you and in your neighbors while you live like this?
For me personally, I think when you are the host, giving hospitality, I feel like God is showing me hospitality. Like I feel His presence so deeply, and that moves me. And just seeing Jesus in my neighbors, I think once you understand that everybody's made in God's image, you can pick out Jesus' traits. And so just encouraging them, I think when someone nice moves into the neighborhood, like, you're not looking at them funny for the way they're dressed. They're just like, whoa, like.
So Nigel, what's the game plan here? And you actually, you know, as Move In got started under your leadership, you actually had heard God just say those two words, move in.
Yeah. He gave me the vision for Move In before the name, and then he just plunked the name down, and that was it, the action, the imperative to move in. And that's the name of our movement.
Have civic structures noticed this? Because like here we've focused on a city, Hamilton, that has the highest race-related crime incident in Canada. Have cities noticed that they need help like this, like Move In? Has anybody civic seen, you know what, this actually could work if we bring in a spiritual demographic into neighborhoods that are hurting?
I think they're aware of the problem, but they're addressing it from a distance. I'm reminded of in Toronto, where I live, a politician went to Jane and Finch, which is a high needs area in Toronto, and he wore a bulletproof vest, which we people in Move In can't relate to because we live there. And actually, my wife and I just had our second baby 3 weeks ago, and we've chosen to live in the neighborhood. And we aren't afraid because we know the people who live there, and we've become part of the fabric of the community. But when you're afraid and when you're trying to solve things from a distance, and when you put on the bulletproof vest to enter a community, it isn't the way to do it, and it certainly isn't the way of Christ who moved in. John 1:14, he dwelt among us, and the Message paraphrase puts it so refreshingly. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood.
All right, and that is the solution I'm hearing from all of us, that if we're going to make Canada a place that has more love on the streets than this worry of hate crime, we need to move in with love. All right, thank you all. Lindsay, Nigel, Kevin, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Context reported the growth of organized hate groups in Canada today. The web has allowed private hate to publish, and now it's emboldened people into hate in public. Our values are sick. Outer rot is showing us we need inner work, and that is best begun in our homes. We don't need another restriction in the criminal code. This growth in our hate stats is a wake-up call for a behavior code. Neglect spiritual teaching, and people miss the inner resource that the Bible says forms our character into love, joy, goodness, and self-control. Not everyone comes by those traits naturally, and that's why religious teaching reminds people that God has pathways for our soul to be improved. And let's make sure our homes are the strongest foundation for this teaching. There's more on our website where you can learn more on how to access that. And from all of us at Context, I'm Lorna Duick. Thanks for watching.